Hi, I'm Terry Murphy with Metasystems, here to present to you a podcast on something we all have to deal with every single day, and that is communication. And our esteemed guest today are Eric Oliver. He is a national trial consultant with over 40 years working with trial attorneys, training them. His expertise is all things communication, neurolinguistics, other than conscious, nonverbal communication. He's written, I don't know, how many books, Eric? 6?
4 if you count them.
That's all good. He's written 4 books on it, so I think he knows a little bit about it. Also on our call today is Amy Pardieck. She's a trial consultant with perceptual litigation. She is a jury researcher extraordinaire, I might add, and a colleague of the Eric Oliver School of Trial Consulting. She's an NLP trainer, that's neurolinguistics, academic education, and systemic psychotherapy. What a smart woman. We are so lucky to have you. So one of the things that I've asked you to weigh in on is this incredible thing we all share in common, which is communication. We do it every day, and yet it's getting harder and harder to communicate. And I've asked you to weigh in because we're addressing what we call impaired attention, especially in the legal system. The issues we have, you and I discussed, Eric, is called fading capacity for attention. Talk to us about what that means.
Well, most people, if you ask them about the attention that jurors or lawyers or judges are able to pay to the stories of their clients that they're delivering, will tell you, yeah, I've noticed that people don't pay as close attention, or yeah, attention spans are shrinking. It's really short attention span theater now. And that is a piece of the story. The problem is that the research that's been developing really since the 60s, but now it's pretty solid, that says that attention is now impaired not just in how long it is, you call it fleeting because it's not as long as it used to be, but it's also fragile. Our capacity to pay full, deep, undivided attention is eroding and has eroded for decades. So that not only can they not pay attention as long, they can't pay attention as strong as they need to do the job as well as it needs to be done. And finally, worst of all, our attention has become fragmented because we've been training ourselves as a society to distract ourselves from the job at hand, to distract ourselves from the task or the project, or in this case, a juror paying attention to your opening statement. So attention is now impaired in 3 significant ways, all of which affect the way that a decision maker in a legal setting can accept or even appreciate the story of your client's case that you're trying to deliver.
So Amy, tell us, what are your thoughts on that?
Juror decision making has changed recently over the last few years. So jurors are making decisions differently now than they were 2 years ago, and definitely way differently than they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So and Eric is talking about the specifics of how juror decision making has changed. And so we need to update how we're delivering the case story to them so that we're tracking with the way their decision making has changed. And to do that, I think it's really important to understand how that juror decision making has changed so that we can understand how we need to update our delivery of the case story to adapt to those changes, knowing that the old ways, which aren't even that old, simple storytelling and story delivery, which we've been doing for years, is still part of what we need to do. But there are other considerations to take.
Those are all good points. Well, recently you were at an event where you had a speaker and they were talking about addressing the issues of attention. We've all heard the goldfish story, but tell us specifically what you learned from that.
Well, so it started out that jurors have the attention of a goldfish, and then there was a discussion about the exceptions to that. So the exceptions are, if we can binge watch, then that is a longer attention span than that of a goldfish. Or if we can get enthralled into a longer movie, that's an exception. And I think that there was a discussion around that, and sort of the takeaway was, if we present a really compelling and engaging case story, then that solves the juror attention problem. And I think that's part of it, but there's way more to this. I think that that's sort of a quick, 5-second introduction to this, and it's a way bigger issue. And Eric has pointed to getting into that in more depth, and also how to handle it in a deeper, more well-rounded way that really gets at the issue and helps provide some concrete solutions to it.
Well, Eric and I talked a little bit about that when he talked about a story using a siren. That was such a good analogy. Go ahead and explain that, Eric.
Okay, so this is from the trial lawyer's perspective. Presume that you've gotten a case, that you've worked it up, you've done your focus group research, you have your witnesses lined up, you've got everything ready, your demonstrators are set up, and it's time for opening statement. You stand up in front of the jurors, you get 2 or 3 words out, and somebody sets off an incredibly loud siren inside the courtroom. But the judge won't let you stop your opening. So for the next 20 minutes while the siren is going on, they can only see your lips move, but they're not getting any of the message. That happens on its own with a certain number of people sitting in the jury box that you can't tell which person at which time that's going to happen. And the research says that 20 minutes is actually a pretty solid number, that they could lose that much of your opening statement and not have it available to them to use later on in deliberation.
Even though there's not a siren. So
there's not a real siren.
So
we bring the siren ourselves. It's like biases, right? They come in pre-biased. Well, they also have a siren inside them too now.
So, but the other distractions have the same effect as the siren that you're talking about.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, most of those distractions are internal because it's become a habit to distract ourselves. And that's what some of the research says. That 8 seconds is very, very narrowly focused. 8 seconds is really when the project that they were looking at is really how long it takes somebody to swipe to a new screen. It's really based solely on looking at a computer. But the hard research done by people like Gloria Marks on people at work or people in college working on a project that they have something invested in that they need to give their attention to. The average time that it takes for somebody to distract themselves from a project they want to pay attention to is 45 seconds. And here's the problem. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I think jurors really, most of them work hard to do a good job. Like they want to pay attention. I don't think that they're intentionally letting their minds wander.
No, that's not what this is about. This isn't the person that doesn't want to be there or is sleeping on the job or wants to look at their cell phone. This is all of us. This affects everybody in this culture, and it has a lot to do with cell phones, but they're not solely to blame. So that 45 seconds, the reason, here's the sad part. The same researcher, Gloria Marks, their studies, and they've been repeated, say that once you distract yourself from a project that you actually want to pay attention to, it takes on average 23 minutes and 17 seconds to get your full and undivided attention back to it. And the reason is because we're so habituated to distract ourselves, on average, you'll distract yourself twice on your way back, which is why it takes so long. That's why the siren analogy for 20 minutes, because if you get distracted, if somebody out of those 12 or 14 people gets distracted from what you're doing, odds are they will not be able to recall what you said during those 23 minutes and 17 seconds with enough force that they'll argue your case for you in deliberation.
Now, Douglas Rushkoff really put a spotlight on that in his book, Future Shock, and he called it digiphrenia. And part of the issue that we have with overcoming that as a human is that when we get those notifications of those interruptions, especially if it's done on a digital basis, it releases literally dopamine into the system, which makes us addictive to being interrupted. In addition to that, television has changed. The camera angles, we used to change every 7 or 8 seconds. Now it's every 3. So your brain is forever doing all of this work. And you're, like you said, you lose track of your focus, which is what we're talking about here today. So Amy, what have you noticed? Has it been different for you and from your perspective?
In terms of jurors being distracted or keeping their attention, I mean, this really makes me nervous because if you think about it, 20 minutes or 23 minutes, a lot of our opening statements are over by
Yeah.
that.
You want to be careful. It's not that they'll develop amnesia for it, but it just will not be retained the way it would be if they were able to give the kind of attention we could do 20 or 30 years ago when we had the ability to answer the question, can I have your full attention, with the word yes. These days, no matter what comes out of their mouth, the odds are they will not be able to give you their full attention. Now, I'm glad you brought up TV because that's the best example I can think of how people train themselves to distract themselves. There's a guy named Neil Postman who wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. He's basically the heir apparent to Marshall McLuhan, who started all of this warnings about how the medium that we're involved with is changing our brains. Anybody that's done traumatic brain injury cases knows the brain has plasticity. It will change itself according to whatever habit you're practicing. And Postman talked about the habit of an announcer, typically a newscaster, but also announcers around drama shows, saying the phrase, "and now this," which is a conjunction that's supposed to connect things. But what it actually does in practice is it divides things. It teaches us to ignore completely what happened just before, which is usually 45 seconds long, and then put our attention onto whatever else has come up as a result of that, only to make sure that you don't do that for any longer than 45 seconds before you throw it away and move on to the next thing. Well, this is training us to distract ourselves. What he said is, there's no murder so brutal, no earthquake so devastating, no political blunder so costly for that matter, no ball score so tantalizing, or weather report so threatening that it cannot be erased from our minds by a newscaster saying, "and now this."
He has such a good voice to do that too, doesn't he? I mean, really. So we know that we have challenges. We have it as trainers, as speakers, as presenters. We know that our attention spans are precious. And so in the series that we're about to develop here, I know that Eric has 24, and I know I'm going to get 24 more from Amy on the solutions, the adjustments, the visions that we have to have. Have you noticed yourself that you have challenges with attorneys having very long opening statements or very long closing statements? I know that's
Well, I know. I've never heard of that.
well, having been witness to some of it, and as a presenter myself, I know that there's only so much data that people want to hear. One of the things that you're really well known for, both of you, is treating the case like a story, which we are so trained from the time we're small that stories engage. Data does not. Tell us going forward what we can expect to learn from the two of you on how to construct that case as a story, how to continually engage those people who desperately need to hear around their biases and their conversational intelligence, right down to presentation skills, which you and I are going to be doing and addressing a lot of, especially for women, Amy, in the courtroom. There are just things we do as presenters, as communicators, even with our spouses and our children, as recently was just demonstrated in Super Communicators, a great book I'd recommend. Tell us what we can expect going forward to help these attorneys, these people that are representing other people, to create the story that makes people understand the facts.
One is a really painful selection process, and that is selecting what do the jurors have to see, learn, hear, feel in order to appreciate our story, and what don't they? What's on the periphery that we can cut out? And I think it's asking a lot of attorneys because they spend years working up the minutia, and then we're expecting them to sort of cut it loose. But I think that it is really identifying what's at the core of this. And if we can get the core of our story right in the opening, then there's a capacity to build on it throughout trial to some extent. Now, many people have heard of Joe Fried's speed trial approach, and he's on it. I mean, it's not so much about the speed, and he says that also. It's not so much about the speed, but really being selective with what we expect of the jurors and knowing, there's a economy of attention, as you all have talked about, that we need to just respect. When we are presenting, or the lawyers try to present openings with 80 slides that go for an hour and a half, at some point for the jurors, that's just disrespectful. And clearly the attorneys don't mean it that way. But in this day and age, I think that's the way a lot of the jurors are experiencing it.
Didn't that just give you goosebumps? I mean, she just nailed it. She actually talked about the respect. And that's the one thing that we hear a lot, especially when we get into the active listening skills. Eric, weigh in on that, please.
Well, the day, if there ever was a day for the fire hose of facts and law delivery, it is long, long past. You do not, I mean, the whole point of opening statement, as far as I'm concerned, is to introduce the case as a story, not to introduce the case as a case. That means you don't try your case in opening, you don't throw every strong fact out in opening, and you don't do a dump of facts and law when you only have one chance to engage them with a story. The difficulty we've got now is that you have to anticipate that they're not going to have their full and undivided attention on you throughout the opening while you try to deliver that. So I agree with what Freed says. I agree with what Amy's saying about it. There are other lawyers out there that have also advocated for shorter trials. And lots of lawyers have experienced it when a judge purposely limits you to a certain number of hours, say 15 hours to deliver a case. And they've found more often than not, the consensus is that it helps plaintiffs' cases to deliver them in a more short, streamlined, and condensed fashion. But that is a painful process, I agree, to go through when you're trying to shave down something to its core so that you can package that and then deliver it in a way that you hope is going to get across. The new added piece is you have to do certain things to enhance the chance that you're going to get somebody's attention for a period of time, knowing full well that these days you are not going to keep it. You have to go back and get it again and again and again.
When we're observing the jurors, we can see their attention focus or not, and going all over the place.
Well, clearly we've got challenges, whether it's at home or in the courtroom, with this communication. And what it's requiring right now to really connect and engage with the people that we most have to. And as trial consultants and as experts in all things communication, I love what we talked about off camera about what kind of communication solutions and awarenesses we can share from this platform. And Amy, you brought up something that was terrific, and that was whole body communication. Never has that been more prevalent than today. So tell us about that.
So many lawyers are trained to speak from their heads up, and jurors just experience that as another talking head, one of the many. And whole body communication is helping the jurors see and learn and feel and experience what the story. But they have to do that through the attorney. So the attorney delivering the story needs to be experiencing it. So there are a lot of sort of communication delivery skills that can be updated to help the jurors keep their attention focused where we need it, as an update to track with where the jurors' attention's going.
Yeah, this brings nonverbal communication, which I know you're both very good at. Eric, what would you add?
Well, as an example of that, for instance, in one area that people know something about and have used somewhat, we need to adjust the delivery. Well, first the packaging, the development, and then the delivery when it comes to the use of demonstrative aids. Okay, visuals are absolutely critical now where they weren't before, because that'll give you a second channel of communication, a second chance maybe to capture somebody's attention when it's ready to wander, and it's ready to wander. So these days, for instance, with the whole body communication, you can use visual oriented gestures if you know what they are. You can put your eyes where they belong. You could choreograph the demonstrative showing up, where it shows up, how it's designed, where you put it on the screen. All of those things, along with moving your body in a way that supports a visual channel of communication. Again, everybody knows what demonstratives are, but nowadays you have to be very careful about how you develop them. They can't be all words. They need to be mostly an illustration, and they have to be consistent throughout the presentation of your case. The rule now has to be anything that can distract will distract. If you let your expert come in with 35-year-old slides because they've always used them that way to describe traumatic brain injury, all that's going to happen is the jurors won't know where to put them because they are not consistent with the rest of the design of your demonstratives, which they've seen since opening statement. That will distract them long enough for most of them to go away for 20 minutes while they're trying to figure out if this guy is helping you or hurting you and why those things don't look the same as all the rest of your demonstratives. Well, that kills the chance to use them to enhance that aspect of your client's story. These things have to be managed now in ways that they weren't before, and it applies across the board, not just demonstratives.
So, Eric, you're designing the demonstratives differently now than you were 5 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And we've gotten a little bit of flack here and there by people saying they're too simple. Well, they can't be too complicated anymore. It's not designed to make you feel good that you've thrown all the possible data onto one slide that you could, because that's the lawyer's approach, okay? The fire hose of facts and law needs to be expunged from your delivery.
Well, it's clear we need a lot more training and awareness on this. And I know that we're going to be coming up with some of the solutions and some of the new initiatives and going into even deeper ways that we need to communicate. It's clear that we need to do that. So if someone wanted either of you to speak or to consult, what's the best way to reach you, Eric?
Through the website or through my email, Metasystems Consulting. It's www.ericoliver.com.
There you go. And Miss Amy?
So through my web page, which is perceptuallitigation.com, and through my email, which is amypardieck@sbcglobal.net.
Yes, and we've always got LinkedIn as well. We're going to be publishing these around different channels so that people can get some of the wisdom they need from you. I know you're going to be joining us again because we've got a whole series coming up. You better stay tuned and catch us coming up in the next couple of weeks with more information on how to get through some of this communication. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.